Hello, everyone, and welcome to the iGaming Intelligent Podcast. This is a part of our ongoing series where we bring you deep insights into the world of iGaming. My name is Kate, and I'll be facilitating the session today. And we have got a colleague of mine, Eduardo, VP of AI Products. Eduardo, hello.
Hi, good morning, Kate. Nice
Nice
to
to
see
have-
you.
nice to see you. And of course, we've got our special guest, C-level person, Chris Bartolo, tech leader. Chris, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, yeah. Nice to see you. I've been in the industry in both iGaming, Forex, FinTech, and a few others over the past 10 to 15 years. C-level for around 10 years now. And I've been working a lot with AI, and especially over the past 2 years in terms of operations and basically multiple industries, especially customer operations and customer experience.
Awesome. We're
Nice to
so
see
happy
you.
to
Nice
have
to see
you
you
here.
again, Chris.
Nice to see you again, Eduardo.
Nice to
Yeah.
see you. So, in this episode, we'll be exploring how technology and innovation are driving change in the iGaming sector. So, let's dive into the exciting discussion and hear Christopher's and Eduardo's insights. So, Chris, which AI capabilities like machine learning, NLPs, computer vision, maybe something else comes to your mind, are moving fastest into live operations?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that AI has been around for a very long time now. It's only since the introduction of ChatGPT where everyone's jumping on the wagon and it's become a very big marketing and promotional area. And I think what's important is with machine learning, it's to understand that machine learning is anomaly detection. It's where we detect patterns, and between patterns, you can detect things which, for example, in terms of cybersecurity, if an email comes in and it's very different than the previous types of emails from this particular person, we can detect that as a potential phishing scam. With AML, we're looking at things where this particular person has a very different, let's say, even something basic as IP detection. This person has logged in from this particular country, but usually it logs in from the other side of the world. And that's where machine learning comes in. With Gen AI, which is now where ChatGPT and the new models, we're looking at very natural language. So we can actually use that with machine learning to even identify and even talk to the data. So while machine learning is finding anomalies, and it was very black box, we don't actually know sometimes why it detected some type of data or some type of anomaly. That's where Gen AI can actually explain to us in plain English why that happened.
That's right. Yes, you're absolutely right, Chris. Machine learning is kind of the granddaddy, if you like, of the kind of AI umbrella. And I know that Symphony has been working with that for, wow, nearly 10 years now. We've been doing image recognition for some of our largest customers on the non-iGaming side, actually. And of course, we've been working with some of our large customers in terms of recommendations and personalization, which again, is all about patterns, identifying patterns, and then building recommendations off that. Probably lagging behind, I guess, a little bit to answer your question, Kate. The computer vision stuff is still a little bit further behind. It's a lot of kind of POC territory for some of the operators, if we exclude kind of ID verification and some fraud detection use cases. And of course, NLP chatbots are, everybody's talking about those because they have a very obvious use case for customer support and product support. So yeah, totally agree with you on that one, Chris.
I do understand your point about the computer vision and operators' attitude to the one, but if you speak about in general to the AI models, how would you, Eduardo, evaluate how mature nowadays most of the operators are at deploying these AI models rather than just making those POCs you mentioned?
Well, if we keep machine learning to one side, because most of them have been doing some of that already. But if we're talking about the Gen AI, most of the operators are probably still in what I'd call POC mode. A few of them have got some pilots for chatbots. That's not really called chatbots because that's almost traditional, but agentic chat, let's call it that. Some of them are POCing them. I know one or two of the larger ones based in the US announced that a few weeks back that they were piloting with a small section of their for their users. And behind the scenes, AI is being used for odds adjustment, some personalization, to a limited extent, possibly churn prediction. But I think probably the large majority is still in kind of either POC or pilot mode.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, especially with a lot of, let's say, the famous AI hallucinations, which we're still trying to figure out how to cater for that even better.
That's right. Yes, I think that's a good point, actually, without going too far down a rabbit hole, but we are spending quite a lot of time talking to our existing customers. And that's one of the most often asked questions. How do we prevent hallucinations? And obviously, there are strategies around grounding with their actual verified content, of course. And it's an area actually that the big language models are actively working on, and we're seeing that improve with every release of every update to those big LLMs. But yeah, it's certainly one of those things that got picked up on in the early days, and people still ask those questions, absolutely.
Moving on with the personalization you have partially mentioned. So, Chris, how should operators structure their data pipelines to fuel real-time play personalization at scale? What do you think?
So with the data pipelines and with AI, as we just mentioned, in AI hallucinations, what's important is always that we're looking at how to validate the data before just spitting it out, right? So with the data pipelines, I always start with refining the query. So whatever we put in, to make sure that the prompt is actually considering the data, and we're adjusting the prompt to improve the input, not just use that input. So first we have to improve the input. From that input, we go into what we call tooling or functions, and we start making the RAG calls. So RAG is where we start retrieving the data from different sources if we need to aggregate more information. And we have to start looking at the context window. So context is very, very important in terms of how you're going to spit out the output. Without context, the AI is going to start making things up based on the large data set that it's been trained on. So within the data pipeline, you start by query refinement. You will make sure that you're giving enough context for the AI to be able to answer correctly. And then using that output and passing it, this is what I like to do personally, passing it to a separate AI to validate the first AI. And that will make sure at least that it's as accurate as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a nice hack. I actually do that myself as well, Chris. I quite often have output from one LLM, bouncing it off another one, and then tweaking it. It's quite interesting to see what they catch.
There's lots of technicalities around it, right? You can go into even what we call guardrails, and I think what's also important is with every part of the pipeline that we're adding onto it, it actually slows down the process. So if you're expecting a 2 millisecond answer, but you have to have 7 different steps, every step is adding more complexity. It's adding more slowness to the output, especially if you go for the larger models rather than the mini models.
Yeah, I know that we've also discussed using hybrid, where you use one lighter weight model, a fast one for maybe something that's quite less intensive, like a simple FAQ, for example, and then something that needs more reasoning, you can use another model.
Yeah, I think that also works very well when you want highly trained or highly specific information. So you don't need let's say the worldwide information, but you need something very specific to your use case, or maybe something even specific to your internal company information.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely.
And it actually does sound like a pretty unique experience for the user, for the player to get within this AI. So, Eduardo, what do you think within the crafting unique game experience, or for example, betting experience, what role will AI play in this case?
Well, it can cover quite a few different roles, really. If we think about it from an operator point of view, and Chris mentioned this, if you don't have the data in place, and if the data is not if you don't have a kind of single source of truth, let's call it like that, then it's going to be pretty tricky for the AI to give it anything that's truly relevant. Yeah, we want to avoid kind of dumb AI, right? From a kind of player point of view, people are kind of moving away from a sort of traditional search way of engaging into more of an ask, right? So this is kind of, and we can probably touch on this in a little bit more depth, but this is my own view that we're kind of moving, there's kind of a real shift, and we're seeing that with Google's launch at Google I/O last week, I think it was, where they're really pushing kind of AI mode. And that's all around having an integration, an engagement model, which is based on a user asking. So you would ask, like, when is the next Barcelona game, right? What are the odds for that game? As opposed for searching for just games in Spain, or, the traditional blue links is kind of going away to almost like a kind of one click, one answer model, right? So that's changing. You could almost imagine a situation where we're moving towards kind of more of a conversational engagement with sportsbooks. We discussed this a couple of years ago when we were building our Bet Harmony chat interface. We said, look, imagine a future where there is no more lobby, not as we see it today, where you just simply are talking or asking your agent, and it's also pushing to you, hey, Eduardo, your favorite team's playing on Saturday. The odds are this right now. Are you interested? You've got $50 in your balance. I can just see like UKGC jumping up and down. But you see, I think that the way we interact with the web is changing dramatically. I watched a very interesting podcast the other day where someone said, oh, so in a way, the web is just becoming a load of back-end APIs, back-end servers, and we'll just be talking. Well, maybe.
I think around that, what was interesting at the initial start of these agentic approaches, they were looking to mimic a user interaction on the browser. And now they're actually looking into adapting MCPs and A2As where it's API to API.
Yeah. Think about the changes then for affiliates. Those top affiliates, basically, they used to be a very frontward facing service to people that were looking for the best crypto casino. In the future, it would just be a bunch of back-end structured content that the LLMs will be accessing. So yeah, you could have different agents using A2A to talk to each other and MCP, and then you're just asking, in a way, you could almost imagine those smaller affiliates are just going to get cut out of the loop.
Yeah, they're going to have to adapt very fast.
They will really have to adapt quickly and think about how do they structure their content in a way that can be crawled more easily by LLMs. But that's we could do a whole nother podcast just on that, I think.
Just catching up on this one, it does sound as if there is some kind of low-hanging fruit for AI-powered marketing or any other stuff in iGaming. So, do you have anything what you can suggest to focus on where you can get ROI fastest within the framework?
Yeah, I can answer that one because we're already talking to customers about that who have asked that question specifically. There's a lot of kind of people have asked some way out ideas, like and honestly, there's a lot of basic things that they can be doing that they're not doing already. I spoke to an operator that was still sending out kind of static emails to customers around. It was kind of a manual process for their campaign management. I was quite surprised because I really thought it would be far more advanced, but apparently a lot of people are still using Excel and manpower to send out campaigns and stuff. So just taking it one step up and using machine language, ML powered targeting, focusing on lifetime value of customers. Think about what can you do to automate a process that is largely manual. Those would have an impact really quickly. The same we talked about it very briefly, but predictive churn. So trying to use a machine learning model there to help on that will have a big impact. If you're not already doing it, then come and speak to us. And as Chris mentioned, the kind of NLP chat interfaces. Those are already being used. We're actually going live with one of our larger customers already. So that is already in progress. If you're not thinking about how do you optimize your customer service and product service, then you should be doing that. Those things will have an immediate impact. Yeah, they're 24/7. You don't need to scale customer service with people anymore, right? You can use people to just focus on the really high value interactions with customers and do all of the kind of repeat, kind of most common FAQ type stuff that happens all the time. Give that to an agentic agent to handle that.
Yeah, although it sounds pretty beneficial for many, many parties included, it does feel there is some kind of risks or something to be aware of, like speaking about AI-driven identity verification. So, Chris, where it is still reliable or where does it break?
Yeah. Well, with AI, as we were saying a lot, it comes around to a lot of hallucinations, and it's also the issue with it. It's especially these larger models. It's a black box. We actually don't know what is actually fueling them and what's actually running in background. So while it can output a lot of high accurate and faster results, we actually have to make sure, like Eduardo was mentioning, it's replacing certain jobs for people. These people now have to look at how to operate these tools, how to validate the output of those tools. It's an example would be like we were mentioning even earlier in terms of compliance. Why is someone flagged? Many times the AI might actually hallucinate and tell you this person was flagged or as a sanctioned player, but he might actually not be. He might just have something very, very small which would have triggered that. So I would say don't overly rely on the output, at least for the time being, until we're figuring out more accurate approaches, and actually train and upskill people to be able to validate and look into what the AI is actually outputting.
That's right. That's a key point. There's sometimes a misconception where people think if you play, you just turn on the AI and just leave it, and then you go and play golf, right? But it doesn't work like that, right? You still need to carry out best practice. That means you need to test the solution. One of the challenges, even on the regulatory side, is around that kind of transparency, knowing how did you get to a particular decision, right? We want to be able to avoid a situation where we say, well, I don't know, the AI did it, right? You cannot blame the AI. The AI is working for you as an operator, so you need to be able to stand behind your own brand, right? That comes into solution design as well, and there's lots of things that you can do. I still think managing by exception makes sense, right? So you still need humans in the loop. You need to have governance in place, and you need to train people. That's really important. You need to train them how to use those tools effectively. And when we're thinking about building an AI, let's call it an AI native solution, then you need to think about those topics, like how do you test, how do you validate, how do you stand behind the product with confidence so that you don't end up with a situation where you're saying, well, I'm not exactly sure how it came up with that, but yeah, I trust it. Yeah, that's not good enough.
And companies think that just adding a disclaimer at the bottom saying, hey, this is an AI, like forgive us if we're wrong.
Exactly.
So, Chris, speaking about fraud detection and payment security, so what do you think? How can AI improve it without degrading user experience so that it could be pretty balanced?
Yeah, I think the NLP is what comes into play here, right? The natural language, the ability to even query and get a proper answer with a breakdown of what was flagged, rather than in the past, especially with machine learning, you don't get an English sentence. You get a technical, structured piece of data. Sometimes it would tell you this is 0.89% accurate. This is while with new LLMs with Gen AI, we can start saying, actually, we think that this might be fraudulent activity. Here's the reasons why. Please provide this data, and that's coming from the new AI trends, right? The new AI implementations. So it's the explanatory part which we're going to start taking a lot of advantage of.
Does it mean that there should be some extra regulations so that the regulators could cope with AI risks in online gambling, or it's not that obligatory? What do you think?
I think a lot of the regulation tends to be a bit also, let's say, not so transparent. So I think we have to add a layer of guardrails in terms of how transparent, how explanatory is the AI going to be to the end user, right? Especially just in case he makes mistakes. You don't want the user to also feel like he's being profiled in those scenarios. So I think regulation has to keep up with what type of data can be shared, what type of information and explanations can be shared to both the front-facing and the back-facing.
Good. So let's move on to some future-proofing strategy working with AI models. So, Eduardo, what do you think? How will AI shift the talent mix in product, data science, risk, and customer support teams?
Well, it's a big one. The first thing to realize is it's moving, I would say it's moving faster than anything that we've seen before in technology. I mean, normally you see when something new kind of comes along, you get at least some, let's say, standardized tech stack in place. And then you get a whole bunch of products and stuff built on that. What we're seeing right now is the actual, even the tech stack is moving so fast. So we're seeing new things come out, new standards and frameworks being released almost weekly. New foundation models are coming out almost weekly, right? It's getting to the point where, from 1 week to the next, you get 3 new models come out, right? And it kind of, there's, I suppose, a few things that we're seeing, if I'm trying to generalize it, we're seeing more focus on kind of open source standards and frameworks so that those big players can all work together. We're seeing advances in tooling, which means that the agents can now work with tools, the LLMs can work with tools. Chris, I think we talked about MCP earlier on, and we touched a little bit on Google's A2E. That means that we can now have a scenario where multiple agents, an agent basically will have its own kind of card, like a card that describes what an agent can do. So I am a betting agent. I can do this. I am a customer support agent. These are my capabilities. And I think it's not going to be too long before we see multiple agents all working together under some kind of orchestration model. This is probably going to change quite a bit. From an operational point of view, I think those roles that you mentioned, like data science, product people, a lot of it is a mindset. So they need to think, what can I do with my job where I can use, for example, Gemini or ChatGPT to make me more productive. But I would say that's a minimum. So, a product person, really a product person could be vibe coding, right? That's a new term, but they can be using a vibe coder to help build a POC internally to demonstrate an idea, right? It means that you can basically move a lot quicker than you would before. There's all sorts of things devs can use. I mean, Chris can talk about that given his background, but we're seeing Copilot and things coming out, which means that you can just do things, especially what I would call grunt work, that kind of boring, heavy lifting coding that nobody really enjoys. Now you can almost treat the AI as a junior dev that can help you do that stuff, right?
I think that's a key term, right? Junior dev. Giving it more authority than it should, I think it's a very high risk.
Yeah, it is a very interesting topic, that as well. But that's generally what we're seeing going. There's definitely going to be some disasters along the way, right? People who put too much trust in a certain situation and then launch something cutting corners that isn't production ready. I can imagine that would happen. But I think really you're going to see a lot more, an explosion of products, right? Because people are able to develop and build things really quickly. There are going to be tons of little products that come out. We've seen it already. We're seeing a lot of kind of, think of it like wrapper-based AIs that are coming out all over the place that do various things. And then the other side of the coin is that the big language models, so the things that ChatGPT can do, that Cloud from Anthropic can do, is growing. So, there are going to be some small applications that will just simply disappear. Why? Because you can do it yourself inside ChatGPT, right? Imagine you're using some sort of calorie tracker app. You don't need to do that anymore. You can just create, a project inside ChatGPT and use it to track all of your calories, suggest all your recipes and all that kind of stuff. So in the context of gaming, think what a marketing team can do now, how amazingly efficient they can be by using AI tools. So there's the kind of tooling side, which I think product owners could really, really accelerate their work with. On the data science side, again, you can use an NLP style interface to do the kind of deep dive into the data for you. Yeah, you don't need to go and write queries yourself or ask somebody in the tech team to go and write you a query. You can do it yourself. So it's such a big topic, Kate, that I basically think it's going to be almost like a horizontal layer that will touch pretty much every part of a business.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, in addition to what Eduardo mentioned about vibe coding, about multi-agentic approach, what else needs to be taken into account so that the companies do not get left behind the AI native market?
So a lot of companies might feel that they're late in the game, right? I think what's important here is it's like we were saying even earlier, a lot of these are proof of concepts. They're still very early. They're changing every single day. So rather than looking into building everything and trying to keep up, start looking into how to take advantage of what there currently is already out there. What you need to start looking at is how can you achieve more by nearly investing less in terms of building. But this doesn't mean that you just find a random tool out there from these wrappers that everyone's creating, right? There's a lot of high risk with that. And with company, especially with internal company data, I think it's very important to find the right partner, even to help you set up your own personal models, your own internal company models, where data is segregated and not being used as part of the training of these large LLMs. You don't want your data out there, especially if you're going to start putting in client information. You don't want the client information being shared to a company or to even servers based in US or outside of your jurisdiction.
And from technical perspective, what would you suggest to the companies that are still hesitating, either to build AI capabilities in-house on their own or to buy it from some possible vendors?
I'd suggest it's very important to start upskilling your people, providing training, even how to use, even in terms of InfoSec and how to choose the right tools that you're going to start implementing. Don't be scared about other companies are implementing their own stuff. It doesn't mean that it's going to be valid in a week, right? With the new technology, you might be implementing something that the new model, like we mentioned MCPs, the new MCPs can actually connect and integrate and actually automate certain things. They now can automate video generation, image generation, right? So you might be able to just latch onto a company which has a solid founding, a solid investment, and use them as a vendor, and start looking into that and upskilling your people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's so true what you are saying, that everything is changing from week to week. So is it even possible to have a look into years ahead, let's say 3 years from now? So what could be the possible AI impact on sportsbook, if you can imagine anything, Eduardo?
Yeah, I was asked this question a couple of weeks ago by somebody, and whenever I think about what's going to happen in the future, I always think about what is not going to change. Okay, and by that I mean nobody wants to have a worse user experience. Nobody wants to have to wait longer for a package to arrive, right? Nobody wants it to take longer to make a withdrawal, right? Nobody wants to pay more for something that is of less value, right? Those things don't change, right? Everybody wants things to be quicker. So from a customer point of view, you want something to be frictionless, right? we used to talk about a Netflix experience when we were using sportsbooks, because Netflix kind of set the bar for being able to find content quickly. But I think it's going to move into much more of a kind of conversational mode. We have been talking about that a lot internally with our own sportsbook platform, about having more of a conversational interface. I think if you think about most, let's use sports books, but it applies to casinos as well. Most of them have a huge amount of inventory. And years ago, that used to be a differentiator. People used to say, we have 15,000 live games, right? That was a big thing. Like, and then after a while, people realized having just a ton of curated content, often manually curated, by the way, actually, from a user experience point of view, that wasn't great, because now I'm like diving everywhere to find Slovenian Division 2 basketball. I have to spend like a couple of minutes trying to find that just to place a bet, right? So it kind of bit them on their ass, to use the expression, right? And then they thought, well, how do we solve this? So they built all this huge inventory. Now they're using machine learning to help give you personalized stuff. Well, imagine a scenario where my app on my phone says, hey, I know that you love Barcelona. They're playing, the live game is starting in an hour. Are you interested? We've got these amazing accumulator bets right here. Just choose one. There you go. A really frictionless way that knows my interest. Doesn't show me greyhounds because I'm not interested in greyhound racing, but does show me Barcelona because it knows that I'm a big fan. Those things I think will change, and voice probably is another thing. Like we're last week, Johnny Ives, his design agency, he is the guy that designed the iPhone, and I think maybe iPod Touch or AirPods or whatever. His company was purchased by OpenAI, and there's a lot of rumors swirling around that they will be producing a next generation mobile phone. So I think we're going to see some really interesting things that will change the way that we as people interact with content. I think it's really changing so fast. It's almost like, if you imagine in evolutionary terms, the Big Bang, we are in the Big Bang right now in terms of AI and the way that it'll impact us. So it's quite hard to predict. There's going to be many new businesses that spring up that simply don't exist today, but probably will exist because of what they can do in 6 months. And existing businesses will have to shift quickly and be super agile. Coming to Chris's point before, without me just droning on for too long, I think we've talked about businesses being agile, right? They need to be even more agile, right? You need to kind of change gears mentally, I think, if you're a leader of one of those operators now.
I think it also
Actually,
makes a big difference in terms of how you plot a strategy for a business nowadays. Like,
oh yeah, exactly. Used to, I mean, some of the basic tenets still there. It's good to have a vision of what you want to do, right? But trying to plan a product roadmap for 2 years, no
your
way.
product might be replaced by AI in a year.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to somebody off the record, who said, it's almost like code is becoming disposable. And I was like, wow, that's a scary but interesting comment. He was using it to as an extreme comment, but I can see what he meant. Yeah, it's knowing that it's probably that part of that code is just going to be completely rewritten in 6 months because something new is coming along. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I think it's also kind of feels like an attack on developers, right?
Yeah, it can do. I think that's another interesting aspect. What's your take on that? We didn't really talk about, what do you think the dev community thinks about all of the advances in AI, Chris?
I see very mixed reactions. I see developers who reject it. They want to refute that that's possible. They give a lot of weight to their work over even refusing getting AI to help them in some situations, right? And I think that's the wrong approach. But then I see others who fully embrace to the point where they're becoming vibe coders. And I think that's another problematic instance, because you actually start recognizing code outputted by AI versus code outputted by a human. I was reviewing some code actually just yesterday, and first thought in my mind, there's AI generated. The design is the same, the colors are AI generated. I think that's also going to be problematic. Where is the uniqueness? And what does that mean? Does it mean that every piece of code being generated by AI is going to have the same issue, the same bugs, the same security gaps? So I think developers have to start upskilling themselves on how they are going to be the ones controlling the AI rather than taking one side or the other. I think it's a bit of the gray area right now, which is, would you pay a developer to do it? Or would you just get someone pay cheaper, pay a junior to be able to vibe code because you don't need that senior to be able to review what the output is? What's going to happen with cybersecurity, where if the bug is everywhere on every piece of code which is doing the same thing, does it mean that all the tools are going to be exposed? How are you going to cover those gaps?
Super
And I think,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
developers have to look into that.
I think the word is governance, isn't it? You have to be smart. You have to be pragmatic about what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. And what our co-founder always says, whatever the challenge is right now, in 2 weeks they'll overcome it. He's got a very optimistic view, right?
Yeah.
Having been myself vibe coding now for about 5 months, the things that were really awful in the first month are not awful anymore, right? There was a bunch of stuff that I couldn't do in the beginning. Now, wow, okay, I can do that. Okay, that was easy, but it's definitely not yet on par with our senior devs. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I assume it will be there one day. Maybe
Probably,
maybe very soon, but we still have to be very cautious even on the applications of it.
yeah. One last thing then, what would be your advice to a dev team at the moment when it comes to kind of being cognizant of AI? Um, what would your words be, your parting words before we round up this podcast?
I'd say use AI as the tool to make your life and your work better. Implement AI in strategic places, for example, in code reviews, in automatic detection of security or even code quality. I've actually done it and we've seen actually much better results, right? We actually have less defects going into production. We have a faster time to detect of our issues. So I think that would be my advice: is use AI as a tool to improve the quality of your work.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Chris.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's been extremely appreciated and valued. And we've touched some on exciting topics within the today's iGaming Intelligent podcast. And I hope you are walking away with a few new ideas and perspectives on the future in iGaming. As always, we're just started, so be sure to tune in for more episodes where we are going to dive deep into some trends and technologies that are shaping this industry nowadays. Until next time, keep innovating and stay ahead of the game. Bye.
What?